I'd like to say good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust's programme for this year's Outing the Past Festival. My name's Paul Edmondson, and I'm Head of Research for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. And we first took part in this LGBTQ plus festival last year, and we all liked it so much that we thought we'd take part again. Sue Sanders is the co-founder with Paul Patrick of the Outing the Past Festival, which has been going since 2004. She's chair of the charity schools Out UK. She is the creator of The Classroom, the website that usualizes, that's a word I know she likes to use, and which she might talk about in a moment, that usualizes LGBTQ plus issues across the curriculum for all ages. It currently has 80 lesson plans and is growing, and is now in partnership with the Proud Trust. Sue has been the recipient of many awards over the years. In February 2015, she received an emeritus professorship from the Harvey Milk School, and in 2019, she was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Rainbow Honours Board. I have been proud to know her for only 1.5 years. Sue, welcome. It's great to have you in our midst.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's an absolute delight. I'm going to share my screen and take you through a bit of history of LGBT History Month, which is slightly different from Out in the Past. So I'll explain the difference because it's all very complicated and we have far too many websites, but we do all far too much. So here goes. So Paul very sweetly has already told you all this. It's very exciting to be a professor. It's a bit funny really because I failed my 11 plus and I only got O-level passes for my A-levels and never went to university. So to get a professorship is I have to say, a bit of a delight and does cheer me up at times and does open a few doors, which is rather nice. Schools Out UK is the mother organisation, and it actually had its roots back in 1974 with the Gay Teachers Group, which was a bunch of teachers who felt that they were getting no support from the unions, which indeed they weren't. The unions weren't the slightest bit interested, and felt they were very vulnerable, which indeed they were. If you came out as a lesbian or gay teacher, and that was the only words we were using in those days, the chances were that you would probably get sacked. So they set themselves up this little social group to support each other, very quickly became political as one of their numbers got sacked by the Inner London Education Authority for coming out to his students. Paul and I discovered them when they sent out a petition saying, would you sign this letter, which the Inner London Education Authority asked him to sign, which said he could have his job back if he never came out to students again, which of course he refused to do. And most of us who signed the petition said, no, we wouldn't. I was about to go off to Australia. I knew I wasn't a career teacher, but I was shocked how few teachers in my college were prepared to sign that. So Gay Teachers Group gradually evolved into Schools Out UK, and we had a very early website, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Out in the Past is a festival that's been running now for 6 years, and this is a part of Out in the Past. History Month started in 2004, I'll tell you more about that, and Paul has very sweetly told you about the classroom. So those are our three sort of projects under the umbrella of Schools Out. This is a really important slide, which we had up on our very, very, very early websites for Schools Out. And I was very keen from the outset for people to really understand the diversity of our community. So the whole point was to make it very clear who we were as LGBT people. And this was way before we had that wonderful word that we now have, intersectionality. So my intention was to make it as comprehensive as possible, and that if people felt we'd left somebody out, they could tell us and we could add it to them. And this has been the cri de coeur of Schools Out ever since, to be absolutely, totally inclusive. I just popped a slide in and obviously put it in the wrong place. So I'm going to go back one. I was terribly excited this morning when I Googled Gay Teachers Group and thought I'd found a very original gay teachers group in England. But in fact, The sharp-sighted ones of you, if you can see it, will actually discover it's Melbourne. So in fact, in 1976, so although I was in Australia at the time, I was in Sydney and I didn't know about this gay teachers group then, which is just discovering it this morning was a bit of a laugh, really. But anyway, you can see people were busy in the 70s trying to get things to happen, both in this country and in Australia. Now, of course, you all know about the joys of Section 28. And for those of you who don't, I'll give you a quickie. This is me back in 1988 with my now current partner, Jean. I think this was probably one of our first dates, going on the last Lesbian Strength March, holding a Schools Out poster called Real Families. And the reason why it was called Real Families was, those of you who know about Section 28, Clause 28, know that it said, thou shalt not promote homosexuality or promote homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Totally and utterly outrageous. So we at Schools Out did lots of fighting against it. And there were lots of groups up and down the country who fought against it. These list of books here are there because the section came under the Local Authority Act. And we didn't know whether, because the word promotion had never been used in law before. So it was a complete brand new concept, which we had no concept of what it actually meant. So did it mean that local authorities wouldn't be able to fund libraries if they showed these books and others? Would it mean that local authorities who are funding theatres would have to tell those theatres not to show gay plays or plays written by gay authors? And given that we were thinking that Shakespeare was at least bisexual, if, you know, would it mean no Shakespeare? Outrage was one of the many organizations up and down the land. There was an amazingly powerful, probably one of the biggest marches ever in Manchester. It was quite incredible, but we were not successful. The irony is that while we were fighting it, it suddenly occurred to me that because it was in the Local Authority Act, Thatcher had already passed the Local Management of Schools Act, which actually meant that Section 28 would not legally affect schools. Now, I went to the National Union of Teachers, as it was then, and asked them, could they check this out? They went to their solicitors. Yes, that was right. And they sent letters to every school in the land telling them that Section 28 did not affect schools. Well, you know, nobody took any notice of that. And it is absolutely horrific, some of the stories that people tell about what happened to them during those 15 years. Lots of teachers went back in the closet. Lots of youngsters said they asked questions of teachers and teachers said they couldn't talk about homosexuality, otherwise they'd lose their job. Schools Out throughout the entirety of those 15 years were very out and proud. Paul and I were both, Paul was a teacher in a school in Southeast London and was completely out. I was doing supply teaching, and we also did lots of training as out LGBT teachers. And we also held conferences virtually every year for people to come to, and where we would show them resources and discuss things. And many of them were at the Drill Hall, which is an amazing place in London. For those of you who may remember the Drill Hall, we've lost it, alas. So Paul and I had been very aware of the danger that Section 28 had done. So it finished in 2003, and the Labour Party were beginning to talk about an Equality Act, which would cover all the various minority groups. So we thought, well, maybe this is the time for us to think about having an LGBT History Month. So we went to the Department of Education. We asked them, would it be possible for them to give us a small grant? And our vision was to have a website that would have a few resources on it, and most importantly, have a calendar on it, so people could put their events up on the calendar and everybody would know about it. We weren't planning to set up any events ourselves. Our role was to make the month available to people and to put resources up so they could use some of those resources, because there wasn't much about history of LGBT people at that time. So I was living at Southwark, a borough in London at the time, and we'd done a lot of work with the council and the police around LGBT issues, really raised the issues quite strongly. And Southwark had just appointed an LGBT officer. And his first job was to find us a place where we could launch History Month. And as you can see here, well, it's not obvious, but it's the Tate Modern. It's the cinema in the Tate Modern. And you'll notice that on this very tiny little platform, because you don't need a big platform in a cinema, we have a lot of people. In fact, there were 13 there. And the reason why is because from the very outset, I was determined that people to recognize that we were really serious about the diversity of our people. So we had 3 trans people. We had LGBT people from a variety of different ethnicities and religions, ages, able-bodied and disabled, and we had a heterosexual ally. You may remember her, Anna Rayburn. So that was our launch, and that set a precedent in that from then on, all our launches are in November, just before Christmas, so that people can start thinking about the month, because if you leave it till after Christmas, February creeps up on you very fast. And we've had them in very exciting and prestigious places. This was something that Paul wrote. And again, it's that attempt to try and get people to recognize our full diversity of LGBT people. And I think, you know, when you think about when we were writing this in 2004, some of this was quite new for people to recognize. There was this whole concept, and Section 28 and the attack on AIDS, a lot of that had made us into, you know, really weird types of people that didn't exist in the real world. So our attempt to try and sort of at a very early stage usualize us was there. Here is Paul with Ian McKellen. Now, Ian McKellen and I and Michael Cashman, we all worked together against Section 28 on the arts lobby. And if you don't know about the arts lobby, there's a brilliant presentation on one of the Outing the Pasts with a film and a radio piece about what went on, brilliant benefits that happened to fund Section 28, the work against Section 28 rather. And then of course, Ian and Michael set up the Stonewall group. Ian is in fact a patron of LGBT History Month, but unfortunately, as you can see, Paul died in 2008, and I miss him to this day. He was such an important person. And to me, it's no sort of surprise that we were both drama teachers in a way. Tony Fennick then picked up the job from Paul, and he became my co-chair. But unfortunately, Tony died last summer. So that was a great loss to me and to Schools Out. He'd been incredibly important in moving us forward, or with the trade unions. He was a great trade union man. And I'll talk more about unions in a minute. And Steve, who had been the chair of trustees and had been with us right at the very beginning, Paul and Steve and I went over to Finland very early on, in the late 90s, at a very anti-homophobic conference. So Steve had been with me for years, but he felt he needed to retire. So big year of loss, which meant that we really had to sort of refresh ourselves. So this is the backroom team of some oldies and some newies. So Seth is a UCU trade union person, and very much links us with the international, and also helped us produce a poster called Voices and Visibility. And if you have a look at that on the website, please do. We've also, at great expense, set up a website that is based on that, which is interactive and means that blind people can get the information, because all the information is read to them. Maisie has been with us now for several years and is sort of our backroom woman, who also helps us a lot with promotion, helps me sometimes because I'm dyslexic in sort of editing a bit, and is there to sort of pick up the pieces, and has been very important with Outing the Past, helping us promote. Andrew has been with us probably the longest of everybody on this photo, and does all our promotion. If you haven't discovered the LGBT History Month Facebook yet, you've got a treat to come. He changes the banners every day, and this month it's absolutely burgeoning with all sorts of interesting information, and links you to all sorts of resources and information. And the BBC has been very busy this year. I was just saying to Paul, we're very excited that the BBC History magazine has actually picked up LGBT History Month for the very first time. Kate is also a member of Diversity Role Models, and as a trans woman is very keen to support all the work that we do to make sure that trans people have their human rights. And at this moment in time, that is a big job. The attack on trans people at the moment is quite appalling. That's a picture of me. And this is Nikia, who joined us this year, last summer, and is a young teacher. Adam has been with us for about maybe 6-7 years and is our poet laureate of LGBT History Month, runs his own publishing company and helps us with promotion as well. Dr. Jeff Evans is the person whom we have to thank for Outing the Past. He was a member of the Schools Out Committee, and after 10 years of LGBT History Month came to me and said, well, Sue, all sorts of exciting things are happening, but where is our history? He at the time was doing a degree and his thesis, which is now a doctor, and he was beginning to meet other academics who were interested in LGBT history. So he came up with this idea of us having the very first Out in the Past 6 years ago, which was a weekend in Manchester. And he invited various people to do presentations, and we had them for the public in the People's History Museum and in the Central Library. And he had an academic event at the LGBT Foundation. But he also introduced, which I was so grateful for and so excited about, a theatrical element to Out in the Past. So we had a piece of theatre which ran over 3 nights, which was documenting and showing us this amazing event that happened in the 1880s up north, where a bunch of men who dragged up and had a drag ball were attacked and arrested and taken to prison. So we had 3 presentations. The first night, the Friday night, we were all in a pub in the Canal Street, watching a cabaret and the actors dancing around together in drag, and then actors as police officers coming in and arresting them and dragging them out. The second part was at the Central Library and was a very interesting look at the politics of what was happening at the time between the police and the press, and one of the journalists who covered it was clearly in a relationship with one of the men who had been arrested. And then the third piece was on the Sunday at the People's History Museum, which was actually the trial of these men, which Steve could use because the trial had been recorded and it was available. So it was incredibly moving. And for me, theatre is such a crucial part of enabling us to understand our history. Mikhail is also a new young teacher who's joined us this summer. Nick is our resident photographer, and he holds an amazing record in that he hasn't missed an LGBT History Month launch right from the very beginning. Nobody else has been able to do that. I've had to miss at least one because of having to go over to the States. But Nick is there every year, and if you go onto the LGBT History Month website, if you look at the Flickr, he's taken oodles of photos, and there's an amazing historical account of all our launches and events, both Out in the Past and LGBT History Month. Beth does our website for LGBT History Month. She just did a refresh at the beginning of this year, and she puts things up and makes sure it all works. Steve is our theatre person, so it's Steve who came up with that wonderful piece and has done several others. And if you go on the Out in Past website, I think he's put up 2 plays which we did a couple of years ago, which was all based in Burnley, and just so exciting. Who knew that Burnley was an absolutely crucial place in the LGBT history? But it is. Lila is our Zoom queen and helped us all technically, taught me how to use Zoom and SurveyMonkey, and has helped the hubs. So we're indebted to her for us that we're all up and running digitally. Abdin joined us this summer and is a doctor. He's an anaesthetist, and he has been doing all sorts of research about what's happening with LGBT people and COVID, and has done at least one, and I think there are a couple more presentations he's been chosen to do for Out in the Past. Jenny does the Out in the Past website. Ken does our academic conference, which we may be able to run this year, but we're not quite sure. And that's a more detailed, in-depth, where academics get together and discuss LGBT history. And Caroline is the person who puts the Gazette together. And the Gazette is our list of all the presenters. And last summer, 70 people offered presentations. So clearly, we're not going to be able to show all those presentations. So eventually, we're hoping that those people who are prepared to record their presentations, we will put them up on the LGBT History Month website. But Caroline does all that hard work of putting everything together. Plus, she has been behind, along with her co-chair, the amazing news that we've just had this year, or this month rather, that finally this government has recognized the need to enable LGBT people who were kicked out of the armed forces to get their awards back. And she has whispered in my ear that that is not the end, there is more to come. So that's our team. None of us get paid. We all do it for the love of it. Some people are more involved than others, but it is, I think, an amazing group of people who enable both Out in the Past and LGBT History Month to happen. We are a charity, so we need to have trustees. Lynn has just replaced Steve and has done a massive amount of work to get us up to speed. We had kind of lost the plot around policies and sort of legal stuff, and she has been working like crazy to make sure that we're more up to date. Max is a past president of the National Union of Teachers, so keeps us really clear on the concept of making sure that we're linked into education. Professor Ian Rivers is up at Strathclyde and has several books about tackling homophobia and its teacher training. And Sophie is a mortgage broker and has come in to be our treasurer, an incredibly important job when you're a tiny tiny charity. So we're very grateful. Both Sophie and Lynn joined us again last summer. So you can see we've done a big refresh. So in 2011, we recognized that one of the things that we could do with LGBT History Month was perhaps explore themes. And we hadn't done it up until then. And you'll notice that if you look at the past websites, which are available in our archive, we have gradually grown and changed. And I've just realized I hadn't put my stopwatch on. So Paul, you might need to just give me a 5-minute nod.
Another few moments yet, and then we'll have some questions. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how far I've gone, so I'm kind of lost the plot. Apologies.
Right, it's just gone 1:20.
So I've got 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
We've got 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll whip through a bit more. So here are the themes that we've done. We started when Britain had the Olympics, so we did 2 years on sport, and true to what I was saying, our launches were in very exciting places. So we're at the Oval Cricket Ground and Rugby Twickenham. STEM, which is science, technology and maths, we were at Bletchley Park. So you can imagine we very much focused on Alan Turing. Music was a doddle, plenty of LGBT people with music. In 2015, we were in the British Museum. And that was amazingly exciting. And I think Laura, who was the community education officer then at the British Museum and who agreed to have us there, has now moved to Derby, and they've just had an Out in the Past event. And she was saying that event at the British Museum really kick-started them to get to look at their LGBT things that they had in the museum and take it seriously. And Richard Parkinson wrote a brilliant book, which is still available, about all the LGBT artifacts that they have in the British Museum. Doing religion and belief was a bit of a challenge. People felt maybe we shouldn't do it because religion had given LGBT people a hard time. But I felt it was important that we looked at both the religions who did support us and also have a go at those that didn't. So this year, our theme is mind, body and spirit. Oh, here are badges. Now, if people who know me will know that you don't leave a room without buying a badge. And this is our badge for this year. And this was from Goldsmiths College. We've moved around universities. And then next year, we've actually set up a national competition for youngsters to supply us with their designs. So we'll be choosing a design from a young person next year from either a primary, secondary or youth group, which I'm very excited about. So our theme, body, mind and spirit, when we chose it, we had no idea we'd be in COVID, or indeed that the Department of Education would be finally saying that sex and relationships should include LGBT, so kind of popular. So we have a face for each area. Lily Parr, oodles of information on the website. Professional footballer, very famous, very well known, and is now in the Football Hall of Fame. But the appalling thing is that the Football Association actually banned women's professional football in 22. It's now obviously back with amazing success, but it's an interesting story, Lily Parr's. Mark Ashton, if you've seen the film Pride, you'll know about him. Really crucial thing that Mark did was, in making common cause with the miners, woke up the unions to actually take on board the need to think about LGBT workers' rights. And now the unions take it very, very seriously. And we're very much grateful to Mark, who sort of worked them all up around that issue. Mayor Angelou is our bisexual, and if you don't know her work, you have a joy to come. As a Black pioneer, she has done masses of work tackling both racism, homophobia, sexism, disableism, brilliant writer, and just an all-round amazing woman. Michael Dilling, very, very, very early trans person, was an athlete in his youth, and as a woman was a rower, and then went on to get degrees and was a doctor on board ship, and then became a Buddhist monk. So really mind, body and spirit, so totally. And again, was a very, very early in being enabled to get his transition. Mark Weston is our plus person, and again, as an intersex person, again, very, very early being able to get the medical support he needed. Outing the Past, you now know about, and you're watching a presentation about it, and it's so lovely to have the Shakespeare Trust back again this year. 18 hubs this year, very exciting, and we'll have 3 more in March. We've got Derry and the National Gallery of Ireland and New York in March. So do go to the website and have a look at the programs. This is my hope, that you do feel part of LGBT History Month. That was my intention of setting it up and really passing over and facilitating people to celebrate. And I'll stop there.
Sue, thank you very much. Are you able to stop sharing your screen as well?
I will stop sharing my screen.
Please. Lovely. There we are. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Well, I had no idea that schools were permitted to promote things.
You had no idea that what?
When you said that schools weren't affected by Section 28.
Technically, no.
They didn't realise. How did that happen? How could that be?
Well, as I say, because Thatcher had passed the local management of schools. So local authorities didn't have authority over schools. And the law was in the Local Authority Act. So technically, it didn't affect it. And, you know, we did try and tell them. But because we had, you know, fought so massively against it, and we talked so much about it, I mean, we almost shot ourselves in the foot because we spent so many time challenging it. People just decided, oh, well, it obviously affects us. And I think a lot of schools maybe knew, but just didn't want to deal with the issue.
I want to remind all those present, and thank you for joining us, that if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat facility, or you can raise your virtual hand by going to the participants, as it were, drop down on the side of Zoom and raising your hand, and then we'll hear from you live. But if you do that, just be aware that you're being recorded for the archive as well, so you're agreeing to be recorded. Sue, what did you most hope for from this year's theme, Body, Mind and Spirit? Because I remember talking to you a year ago, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it's almost as if it's taken off naturally somehow. Yes,
I mean, I think when we all our themes are connected to the curriculum, because, you know, we are a schools-based organisation, although obviously we facilitate a lot more than just schools these days. So Mind, Body and Spirit was very much thinking of the PHSE, Personal, Sex and Health Education. And as I say, at that point, we had no idea that the DFE would be finally saying that LGBT issues should now be in the sex and relationship curriculum. So I think it was incredibly fortuitous. And my hope has been that we have enabled schools to be more inclusive and given them the confidence to do the work that desperately needs to be done in schools.
You were saying before we went on air, as it were, the differences and the changes and the things and the causes for concern that you've spotted recently in government and in our political and national life. Could I invite you to say a bit more about those, but also where we can find out more about them?
Okay, well, if Find Times has just is an online, well, it both publishes and it's an online, but if you go online, there's a very useful editorial in Find Times, really trying to tell you what's going down at the moment. We are in a very serious backlash, right-wing backlash. So the attack on trans people at the moment is quite horrific, and that is coming from both the government and from right-wing groups, including LGBT groups, which is, you know, very painful to see. The Department of Education put out very worrying guidance, and it was guidance. It's not in any way legally binding. And that's why I feel it's a bit like Section 28 again, because this guidance has gone out and it was very woolly and it said some weird stuff. And it was talking about all sorts of extraordinary things about you couldn't have groups going into schools that didn't support democracy and didn't do this and didn't do that. And an anti-trans group has used that guidance to write to every school in the land and say, well, now given this guidance, you can't have Stonewall and Proud Trust and other organizations coming into your schools. Complete lie, complete lie. So it's really worrying that this stuff is going out. There's also some concern that this government is not being is not behind the whole concept of tackling racism. We have Priti Patel who's saying racism doesn't exist in this country, our Home Secretary. We have a really considerably worrying concept around freedom of speech. And there is a minister calling in museums and archives next week to discuss with them the fact that they should be sticking with British history. And that's, I think, underneath that is actually saying, don't do Black history and don't do LGBT history, because a lot of the museums and archives and schools have listened to the Black Lives Matter call and are very clear that they have been very neglectful of a lot of minorities' history. But I think there is a backlash, and we are going to have to be very clear that we need to stand our ground and say, museums, archives, schools, you're all paid for by everybody in the country. We're all taxpayers, whether we are Black, white, straight, gay, able-bodied, disabled, whatever. And we have a right for our history to be seen both in our schools and in our museums and archives. And I suspect we might have a bit of a fight on our hands to make sure that that continues.
A year ago, I was privileged to host you for dinner in front of these books where I'm now sitting.
Yes.
I was struck with our friend Luke Turner, and I was struck very much by that phrase "usualize" that you have used today.
Yes.
And I liked what you said about it. Can you talk a little bit about that word "usualize"?
Sure. I coined it because I really find the concept of normal and normalizing very problematic. It has all sorts of very negative overtones. So when, after LGBT History Month sort of began to be successful, we then set up the Classroom website. And that is a website which usualizes LGBT people across the curriculum. So it's not a gay lesson, it's not a gay assembly. It is a lesson in biology or history or maths which drop in LGBT people. It sticks to the curriculum and it just usualizes us. So it's that process of education, not making a fuss, not making a big to-do, it's just usualizing us. And I think it's interesting how many people like you have sort of locked on to the concept of using usualizing, because I think people have been struggling with the word normal and normalizing. Thank you.
Well, it's all been fascinating, and we are delighted to see you in person.
It's lovely to be here. I have in my mind's eye just how lovely that your venue is, and I miss it.
Bless you. Thank you. And the Shakespeare Centre, well, hopefully we'll be there again next year. And we've just got a comment in chat. I'm just having a quick look from Eleanor. Fascinating to learn the history of the month itself and all the important work that's been done by generations before my own. Well, you've been going a decade now officially, haven't you? It's your 10th.
Yes. I mean, frighteningly, I'm going to be 74 next month. I don't quite know how that's happened, but yes, it's been a long struggle and a long piece of work. But yes, we've History Month's been going since 2004. The very early schools out, gay teachers started in 74. So we will be having some big anniversaries coming up soon, which I'm really looking forward to, and hoping to pull people together who've been around all those years so that we can celebrate all the amazing work that so many people have done down the line.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Sue. Thank you very much indeed.